Hello, and welcome to a quick overview of Chapter 1, the historic background of the New Testament. I just want to give you, like I said, a quick overview, and then I'm going to let you continue on with your readings. You will need to do that and so forth. It's not to replace that, but just kind of give you the high-level view, and then you can take it from there. What I want to look at are the historical movements and peoples that are the background that bring us to the New Testament. And to do that, we have to start back in the Old Testament. Back in Genesis chapter 12, we have Abraham, the covenant being made there, and the beginning of the nation of Israel coming through his successors and his family line and so forth. We ultimately get the 12 tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes of Israel were told by God how to behave, what to do, and all those kinds of things. The covenant was made with them, and they repeatedly broke the covenant, repeatedly were not doing the things that they were supposed to be doing. And so God said that he would send them into exile. So at one point, they divided themselves after Solomon was king, his successor, his son. The nation of Israel divided into 12 tribes, and it was the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes. And so the northern tribes became the kingdom of Israel, and the southern tribes the kingdom of Judah. Well, God allowed the nation of Israel, the northern tribes, to be conquered and carried off into exile in about the 700 BC time frame. And the Assyrians were the people that did that, and that was the world power at that point. They were kind of in the northern part of what we would know as the Middle East, coming out of those areas. And so that they came and exiled, which means that they came and took the Israelites, took them away from their homeland and put them in towns and cities that they did not know, because that was the way you exile people, to kind of keep them under control. Then we get to about 600 BC, and we have the southern tribes, the tribe of Judah, and they are carried away in exile by the new dominant world power, which is that of the Babylonians. We think of the area of Iraq, many parts of that, Baghdad and so forth. Those are the areas of the Babylonians. And so the Babylonians are the power that rule. That's Nebuchadnezzar and all of those that you may have heard of. That's the time frame that we have Daniel and the Daniel Lion's Den, and also in the fiery furnace and all of that type of stuff. That's part of that Babylonian period. Then the next world power to come into play are the Persians, and the Persians conquer the world, and they take then now Israel and Judah, that are pretty much combined together, captive. But the Persians were a little bit nicer in the sense that they allowed the Jews to go back to their homeland. In fact, they even helped them to rebuild the wall. We find that in Nehemiah, and rebuilt the temple under Zerubbabel, even though it's a pretty utilitarian, temple, in that it's not ornate and so forth. It's often called the Second Temple. And so they're able to exist in that way for quite some time, until there comes along somebody called Alexander the Great, the Greek Empire, and also Macedonian Empire, covering a little bit larger area. Alexander the Great conquers the world, and he begins the process which is called Hellenization, which means converting everybody to the Greek way of life and Greek language and all of those things, which is the first step toward getting us ready for the New Testament and the story that's there, and Christ coming. Everything is moving along smoothly for Alexander the Great, except he doesn't live long. And when he dies, his kingdom is divided up amongst his generals, and we get the Ptolemies and the Seleucids at that point. The Ptolemies are those who take over Egypt and have that part of the world. Seleucids are a little bit less powerful, and they're in kind of the northern area. And then ultimately the Seleucids become the ones that are the powerful ones. And in that we have Antiochus Epiphanes, who really does some bad things and tries to enforce paganism on the Jews, and goes and sacrifices a pig in the temple, which really makes the Jews mad because they don't like pigs, and they see them as unclean. And so that starts a revolt. So now we have moved from 700s, where the Assyrians take over the northern kingdom of Israel, the 600s when the Babylonians take over the southern kingdom of Judah, the 500s when Persia is in power, the 400s, Persians still in power. We get to 300s, we have the Greeks, and 200s BC, Egypt is pretty much in power, and then the Seleucids become in power with the Syrian Empire and so forth, what names we would be familiar with today. And that's 100 BCs. And out of that atrocity that happens in the temple, that leads us to have a group by the name of the Maccabees, which come into play and lead a revolt. And it's in this time period that we have the emergence of things like the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, other groups that you'll be looking at. Just some quick things about that. The Pharisees are very legalistic. They're the ones that are about the rules, and when you get to the New Testament, you see them always poking Jesus about the fact that he's not keeping all the rules and doing all the right things. And if you want to remember what they think about the laws and stuff, you can use it's kind of a funny ditty, that's every time something is happening, they say it's not fair, you seize, and so they're about the laws. Then you have the Sadducees, and the Sadducees are also a religious sect within Judaism, and they're more of the church elite, temple elite, so to speak. And the big thing with them is they do not believe in the bodily resurrection. And so the funny thing there is that's what makes them sad, you see. It's because they don't believe in the resurrection. So I'm sorry, that's as good as the humor gets. Then you have the Essenes, which is where we get the Qumran community from, which is where we get the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. And they're pretty much a monastic, stick to themselves kind of group of people. Then Rome comes to power about 100 BC, and it's during their reign that we change from BC to AD. And so with that we have Pompey, we have Julius Caesar, we have Augustus, we have Herod the Great, who's the king that's ruling when Jesus is born. He has a little bit of a good relationship with the Jews. He builds them a new temple, and it's a pretty elaborate temple, better than what they had with Zerubbabel, but not quite as good as what they had with Solomon. But they're still Jews being captive by another nation, and they still are not happy, understandably. Then we move to AD, and that brings us to the point where Jesus is born. It's not right at the AD 1, but 3 or 4 years after that, and that's where we get Tiberius, Pontius Pilate, and so forth. And it's during that time period from to about 100 AD that we have the various parts that we're talking about with the New Testament. In 70, AD 70, the Romans sack Jerusalem and destroy the temple, and that's what pushes the church into synagogues even more, and pushes them farther out of the mainstream Judaism that we're used to, and that kind of brings us to where we are at the time frame of the New Testament. So when you have Peter and Paul and the other apostles leading, it's during this first 100 years, basically, of AD. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview, and that helps you a little bit.